Y'all ever heard the phrase man up? It seems like we hear it everywhere, right? From the playground to the workplace, there's this pressure on men to fit a certain mold. That mold, well, it's what we call toxic masculinity. It's like this invisible force telling boys and men they gotta be tough, hide their feelings, and be in control all the time. But here's the thing. Being a man ain't about any of that. It's about being comfortable in your own skin, treating everyone with respect, and not being afraid to show your true self. Toxic masculinity? It's like a disease, eating away at the hearts of good men and causing all sorts of problems in our communities. We're gonna break this down, y'all. We're gonna talk about what toxic masculinity really is, how it affects us all, and most importantly, how we can start to change it. Because everyone deserves to live in a world where they can be themselves, free from harmful expectations. Now, toxic masculinity doesn't mean that all men are toxic, not at all. It's more about these harmful stereotypes and expectations that society throws on men. It's like this unspoken code that says men gotta be strong, dominant, and unemotional. And when men don't fit into this narrow box, they get judged, ridiculed, even ostracized. It's like walking on eggshells, always trying to prove their manhood. This pressure cooker of toxic masculinity can lead to a whole mess of problems. Violence, aggression, substance abuse, depression, you name it. It hurts men, it hurts women, it hurts everyone. But here's the good news. We can change this. By understanding toxic masculinity and calling it out when we see it, we can create a healthier, more equitable world for everyone. Now, y'all ever notice how toxic masculinity glorifies all the wrong things? It's like there's this picture-perfect image of what a real man should be, and it's usually holding a beer in one hand and a power tool in the other. Don't get me wrong, there ain't nothing wrong with working hard and enjoying a cold one every now and then. But when those things become the only way to prove your manhood, well, that's when things get dicey. It's like this unspoken rule book. Real men don't eat salads, they devour steaks. Real men don't take naps, they burn the midnight oil. Real men don't talk about their feelings, they bottle them up until they explode. This constant pressure to live up to this impossible standard, it takes a toll. Men start neglecting their health, both physical and mental. They push themselves to the limit, ignoring warning signs their bodies are screaming at them. And for what? To prove they fit into some outdated definition of manhood? One of the biggest problems with this whole manly man image is that it teaches men to ignore their bodies. It's like they're conditioned to think they're invincible, that they can just keep pushing and pushing without any consequences. But here's the truth. A body ain't a machine. It needs rest, it needs proper fuel, it needs to be taken care of. But toxic masculinity, it whispers in their ear, nah, real men don't need sleep. Real men don't need to see a doctor. Real men just power through the pain. And so they do, until they can't anymore. They end up with chronic health problems, burned out and emotionally drained. And y'all know what the saddest part is? A lot of men, they don't even realize they're caught in this toxic web. They've been taught from a young age that this is just what it means to be a man. It's time we start teaching our boys a different way. Section 5, the strong silent type. Now let's talk about emotions for a minute. Toxic masculinity, it tells men that showing emotion is a sign of weakness. It encourages them to keep everything bottled up inside, to be that strong, silent type. But y'all, holding in your emotions, it's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can fight it, you can struggle, but eventually, it's gonna pop up to the surface. And when it does, it ain't always pretty. All that pent-up frustration, sadness, and anger, it has to go somewhere. Sometimes it comes out as anger, sometimes as substance abuse, sometimes as depression. And none of those things are healthy for the man himself or for the folks around him. Men deserve to feel the full range of human emotions, just like anyone else. They deserve to laugh, to cry, to express their fears and their joys without fear of judgment. It's time we break down this wall of silence and let men know it's okay to not be okay all the time. Section 6, the mind is a muscle too. Y'all know how we talked about how toxic masculinity makes men ignore their physical health? Well, it does the same thing to their mental health. It's like there's this stigma, this shame, attached to men admitting they're struggling emotionally. It's like they're supposed to have it all figured out, to be the strong, silent type who never cracks under pressure. But here's the thing. The mind is a muscle too, y'all. And just like any other muscle, it can get tired, it can get injured, it can need some TLC. But toxic masculinity, it tells men that asking for help is a sign of weakness. It tells them to just man up and deal with it, and that's just plain wrong. Seeking help, whether it's from a therapist, a counselor, or even just a trusted friend, it ain't weak, it's brave. It takes strength to admit you need support, to reach out and ask for a hand. Section 7, shame and silence. This whole culture of shame and silence around men's mental health, it's gotta stop. It's keeping men from getting the help they need, and it's costing lives. Men are more likely than women to die by suicide, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're less likely to reach out for help. They're afraid of being judged, afraid of being seen as weak or inadequate. And so they suffer in silence, their pain hidden behind a mask of stoicism. But y'all, behind every mask, there's a human being with feelings and emotions just like everyone else. It's time we create a world where men feel comfortable talking about their mental health, where seeking help is seen as a sign of strength, not weakness. So how do we break down these barriers? How do we create a world where men feel just as comfortable talking about their feelings as they do talking about sports or cars? Well, it starts with changing the conversation. We got to start talking about mental health openly and honestly without judgment or shame. We got to teach our boys that it's okay to not be okay, that asking for help is a sign of strength, and that their emotions are valid and deserve to be heard. And we got to support the men in our lives who are struggling. Let them know we're there for them, that they don't have to go through this alone. Because when we create a world where men feel safe to be vulnerable, we all benefit. Now, y'all know that masculinity ain't one size fits all. It's like a quilt, with all these different colors and patterns woven together. A man's race, his ethnicity, his cultural background, all these things play a role in how he sees himself and how others see him. And sometimes those expectations can be even more rigid and unforgiving. For example, Asian American men might face stereotypes of being emasculated or not masculine enough. Latino men might feel pressure to be the macho provider, always in control. And for black men, well, they've got a whole other set of challenges. They might be stereotyped as aggressive or dangerous, which can lead to discrimination and even violence. Toxic masculinity, it doesn't discriminate, but it sure does intersect with race and culture in some messed up ways. Let's talk about this thing called John Henryism for a minute. You ever heard of that? It's this idea that black men, facing all kinds of systemic barriers and racism, feel this immense pressure to work twice as hard, to be twice as strong just to prove themselves. It's like they're constantly fighting an uphill battle and they feel like they can't show any weakness, can't ask for help, because the world's already against them. And y'all, that kind of pressure, it takes a toll. It can lead to stress, hypertension, all kinds of health problems. It's like they're carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, and they're expected to do it with a smile on their face. We gotta do better by our black men, y'all. We gotta acknowledge the unique pressures they face and create a world where they feel supported and valued for who they are. Now, let's not forget about our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters. Toxic masculinity, it can be even more harmful for folks who don't fit into those traditional gender roles. Imagine being a young boy who loves to dance, who's drawn to sparkly things, but who's constantly told that those things are for girls. Imagine the pain of having your identity questioned, invalidated, just because you don't fit into that narrow box of what society says a boy should be. And for transgender individuals, well, they often face even more discrimination and violence, just for being who they are. It's heartbreaking, y'all. We gotta create a world where everyone, regardless of their gender identity or sexual orientation, feels safe, respected, and loved for who they truly are. Now let's talk about helping behavior for a minute. Y'all ever seen something happening, something wrong, but you just froze? Maybe it was someone being bullied, or maybe it was something even worse. It's like this instinct to look away, to pretend you didn't see it. That's the bystander effect, and it's something we all struggle with sometimes. But here's the thing, toxic masculinity, it can make that bystander effect even worse. See, when men are taught that they have to be tough and in control all the time, it can be hard for them to speak up against injustice, even when they know it's the right thing to do. They might worry about looking weak, or they might be afraid of retaliation. And so they stay silent, and the cycle of harm continues. Think about it like this. Imagine you're a young man, and you see a group of guys picking on another guy. Maybe they're calling him names. Maybe they're threatening him. Now inside you know it's wrong, you want to do something. But then that little voice in your head, that voice of toxic masculinity, it starts whispering. What if they turn on you, it says? What if they think you're weak for defending him? And so, a lot of times that fear of judgment, it wins out. And the opportunity to help, to make a difference, it slips away. Section 14, redefining strength and courage. But y'all, true strength ain't about staying silent in the face of injustice. It ain't about looking tough while someone else gets hurt. True strength, true courage, it's about speaking up, about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. And that's a message we need to be teaching our boys from a young age. We need to show them that it's okay to be compassionate, to be empathetic, to care about other people. We need to redefine what it means to be a man, to show them that true strength comes from within. Because when we raise a generation of men who aren't afraid to show their hearts, who aren't afraid to stand up for what's right, that's when we'll start to see real change in the world. Section 15, everyday toxic masculinity. Now sometimes toxic masculinity, it ain't always this big dramatic thing. Sometimes it shows up in these little everyday ways that we might not even notice at first. Like, you ever hear a group of guys making fun of another guy for ordering a girly drink at a bar? Or for wearing a pink shirt? That's toxic masculinity right there. It's this need to police each other's behavior, to make sure everyone's staying within those narrow lines of what's considered manly. Or how about when a guy gets passed over for a promotion, and instead of examining the situation, he just doubles down on working even harder, even longer hours. That's toxic masculinity telling him that his worth is tied to his productivity, to his ability to provide. It's these little things, y'all, that add up over time and create this culture where men feel like they can't be their true selves. Section 16, relationships and toxic expectations. And speaking of relationships, well, toxic masculinity can really wreak havoc there. It can create all kinds of unrealistic expectations for both men and women. Men might feel like they always have to be the strong one, the provider, the protector. They might bottle up their emotions because they don't want to burden their partner. And women, well, they might feel pressured to be the emotional caretakers, always there to soothe their man's ego and pick up the pieces. It's like this unhealthy dance, y'all, where nobody's really getting what they need. But it doesn't have to be this way. When we let go of these toxic expectations, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and authentic with each other, that's when we can create truly loving and supportive relationships. Section 17, unmasking toxic masculinity. So, how do we unmask this toxic masculinity? How do we start to dismantle these harmful norms that have been passed down for generations? Well, it starts with awareness. We got to start paying attention to the ways that toxic masculinity shows up in our own lives, in our relationships, in our communities. And once we see it, we got to call it out. We got to challenge those harmful stereotypes and expectations. We got to teach our sons a different way of being in the world. It's not going to be easy, y'all. These norms, they're deeply ingrained. But change is possible. It starts with each and every one of us. Section 18, a new path forward. Look, we've covered a lot of ground here, y'all. We've talked about the ways toxic masculinity hurts men, women, and everyone in between. But the good news is, it don't have to be this way. We can create a world where men feel free to be themselves, to express their emotions, to ask for help when they need it. It starts with each and every one of us. We gotta challenge those old, outdated ideas about what it means to be a man. We gotta raise our sons with love and empathy, teaching them that their worth ain't tied to their muscles or their paychecks. And to the men out there who are tired of playing by these toxic rules, well, it's time to rewrite the script. It's time to embrace your vulnerability, your sensitivity, your full humanity. It ain't always easy going against the grain, but trust me, it's worth it. Because when we free ourselves from the shackles of toxic masculinity, we free ourselves to live more authentic, more joyful, and more fulfilling lives.